Good morning. Very sadly, we're here to talk about Marcia, who was just an amazing person. I hope that a lot of you knew her and had a chance to actually see her work and get to know her somewhat. She lived in Eugene for many years, and I wrote a little something about her. Marcia was a lot of things to a lot of people. She was smart, funny, trustworthy, mischievous, and devoted to those she loved and the causes she took on. She was a wonderful metalsmith, designer, teacher, gardener, and friend. She was deeply in love with her husband, who was smart enough to give her lots of room. I went to a memorial service in Eugene last month and was struck by the number of people who talked about Marcia as being their best friend. I wanted to jump up and say, no, she was my best friend. But I didn't, because I realized we all felt the same way. Marcia and I were close friends, but Marcia had tons of close friends, and I'm sure they all felt the same as I did. It's a real gift to be able to connect to others in that way. Until she got sick and I started following her Caring Bridge on her Caring Bridge blog, I had no idea just how many lives she had touched over the years. She liked cooking, baking, and taking care of people. She was complex and interesting and surrounded herself with complex and interesting people. Over the years, we shared hotel rooms, grooming, and sartorial tips and secrets. We also shared lots of laughs and a number of gin tonics. She had a great sense of humor and looked for the humor in life. Her laugh came easily and was infectious. Marcia was no saint, and she did not put up with fools quietly. As a matter of fact, she did few things quietly. There were no awkward silences when Marcia was around. I wonder who will fill those silences now.
When I began thinking about how I would approach honoring Marcia, naturally I reached out to those who I knew were close to her and asked if they would share their thoughts and stories with me. I received very thoughtful and touching, and in most cases, hilarious responses, including one in which Marcia channeled a dentist and used her flex shaft to sand down a sharp spot on one of her mother's teeth. Consistently throughout the responses, Marcia was described as vibrant, enthusiastic, dedicated, authentic, talented, obsessively organized, and of course, funny as hell. We are all very fortunate to have had her in our lives. Initially, it was my intention to read the responses I received to you. However, after returning to Marcia's online cancer blog journal at the Caring Bridge website, I decided to share her thoughts and reflections. I read the journal from beginning to end, and even as Marcia's health deteriorated, and I was well aware of the outcome, I was still completely unprepared for her husband Steve's final entry letting us know that Marcia had passed away. It knocked the wind out of me. This blog is just one way that Marcia lives on. Her thoughts, her insights, her ups and downs, her anger, fear, joy, and humor are all there and are deeply moving and inspirational. The over 12,000 entries from friends and family attest to just how loved, respected, and admired she was and is. Throughout her ordeal, Marcia maintained an intense sense of hope, determination, and grace. I've selected several of her blog entries that I believe represent the Marcia I knew. So this is Marcia speaking, or writing. Fear is a strong feeling. Thank goodness I seem to be able to balance it out with the love of life that is so big and strong that the days when that fear wants to creep its way into everything I try to do, I push it back. I am wearing boxing gloves. I respect fear, and I know I have to look it straight in the face when it comes near. I have less moments of fear than I do enjoyment, but I'd be kidding myself and all of you if I didn't tell you that I am scared daily. This may sound odd, but I think I'm the happiest right now I've ever been in my life. I love deeply and I feel love deeply, and I think what in the world could be any better? Oh, not having cancer would definitely be there on the top of my list. Maybe Santa will bring me that. But I mean it. I love every minute of this crazy life, and I think there are always things to change about me, the world, etc. But in the big picture, it is a wonderful life. And that happens to be one of my favorite movies of all time, too. The leaves have been so beautiful this fall. Today I saw a red that was the most sublime red I have ever seen. Just when you think you have seen a color, really seen it, and then a bright red leaf pops before your eyes and you get to see red as if you have never laid eyes on it. I think that is a miracle. I don't think you can really improve on nature. The change of seasons always makes me feel more introspective. In this space, I feel I learn more about myself. I love this time of year. I think I make better work in my studio. I think I've always been a seeker of fun, friendship, connection, and meaning. And it is always the best when I find meaning in the things I do. I have always found meaning in making. One can take such things for granted. It is nice to discover the happy joy in making and spending hours creating. It makes me feel lucky and alive. This chemo seems to be making me very tired, understatement, and rubs up against everything in my personality that says, let's go, let's do more, let's make more, let's plan, let's play, let's do even more, let's laugh, let's talk, let's do even way more, let's do something fun, let's think of the future. I received a roll of quarters from Eleanor Modi and Michael Croft so I can continue to drop the F-bomb and be able to give Steve, my husband, quarters. I told her I was trying to stop dropping the F-bomb, and every time I do, I have to give Steve a quarter. So she said I need to keep dropping them, especially now, so she mailed me a whole roll. Man, I have creative people in my life. I had a very nice nurse who reassured me that God will take care of me if the medicine doesn't. I wanted to ask her why he didn't think to take care of me in the first place so I wouldn't get cancer at all, but instead just said, "Will you please put me in your prayers?" She said she would. Many people that believe in God are closer to God than I will ever be. So hopefully those that are closer can pull some strings and get me some help in that department. I can't say I do or do not believe. At any rate, I have just learned to say thanks when people tell me I'm on their prayer list. The beach was grand. We had an ocean view, kitchenette, and well, it was just perfect. The days we spent exploring and sitting, reading in the sun, watching people fish from the shoreline, and listen to all of our neighbors have cocktails, play with their kids and dogs, and have barbecues, it was really swell. On the way down, we stopped in Kingston and ate at a place called King's Barbecue after seeing a sign that read, King's Barbecue, home of the famous pig and the puppy sandwich. Oh boy, this was going to be awesome. Steve had a barbecue plate with coleslaw and hush puppies. I had, you guessed it, the famous pig and a puppy sandwich. It was good. It was better than good. It was a pile of greasy deliciousness. It consisted of a larger-than-life itself hush puppy that had some of the soft cornbread scooped out to make room for the barbecue and slaw. The barbecue was cooked to perfection. It was a 6-napkin affair. They had paper towels on the table, my kind of place. Steve always manages to, 1, keep his napkin in the same shape as it comes out of the factory in, and 2, never uses more than 1. Me, on the other hand, I'm a tree hugger's nightmare. I am a crumpler. I can use 6 napkins at one sitting and only be eating a muffin. I am anal and I don't like being messy. If scuba gear wasn't so cumbersome, I'd wear it to eat on most occasions and still want to hose off. It took all 3 days to degrease. Thanks so much for bringing me into your lives every day. It makes mine so much better. Marcia. And finally, her husband Steve's final entry, I quote, "I know she is present everywhere, then, now, and always." Thank you.
Born and educated in Finland, Heikki Seppä taught at Washington University in St. Louis from 1965 until the program closed in 1992. His seminal and iconic book, Form Emphasis for Metalsmiths, was first printed in 1978, and it changed the face of metalsmithing. Heikki lived on Bainbridge with his wife, Lori Lyle, who's here today. But rather than recite his vitals, there is a solid piece in a recent SMG newsletter and a wonderful interview online done with Lloyd Herman. I'd like to simply touch on his legacy and include a few quotes from former students and colleagues. Heikki developed and taught an entirely new way of working, and more importantly, thinking about the way we work by establishing a new language and lexicon of forms and processes. It's what we now call shell forming and anticlastic raising. When the name Heikki Seppä is said, I think that most metalsmiths think of the monoshell, the spiculum, but there was so much more to it. Sorry, that's a little dark, but you can see the spiculums hanging there, and the naked guy in back of him. Heikki says, when the shell structures idea began to evolve, I realized that it was not just a matter of substance, it was a matter of ideology. It was something that could rejuvenate the whole thinking. Heikki loved language. He read the dictionary for pleasure. Laurie mentioned to me that pusillanimous was a recent favorite, and I had to look it up. It sounded so, I don't know, kind of a little dirty. But it means timid, which I thought was just fascinating. The effect of this new lexicon of form and process was characterized by former grad student Nancy Lincoln. His developing a language that talked about form in a way that was not related to function was a rebellion against the old school of traditional silversmithing and hollowware. Call it a domical form rather than a bowl, and it opens the craft person to think freely about form, to be more creative. Opening doors into new interpretations of classic functional forms. A simple cup or candle snuffer becomes a form of expression. A teapot becomes something else entirely. Can you guys see the names down there? Can you read those? Great. This is an image of Heikki taken by the artist. Heikki didn't believe in spending money on photography, apparently. That was shared with me by Laurie. That's not my judgment. There's not a lot of great shots out there. I looked of his work. He preferred to document his work himself. He didn't take very good pictures, but he could draw very well. Speaking in that interview, he says, I can draw three-dimensionally, and I can present my ideas that way, but I always find shortcomings in those things. Hinting at the dialogue that he had with his material, Heikki continues, I'd rather spend that time taking the risk on metal directly. I think that's a pretty brave thing to say, and it's a pretty amazing thing. He's working directly in the metal. Now, if you look up on the corner of the little disc is reticulation. Reticulation was a process Heikki learned in Finland. It had been brought home from Russia by Finnish silversmiths who had worked at the Fabergé studios where it was discovered and developed. Heikki brought the technique to America and coined the term in English. This is something we use every day in our studios, right? And this is the guy that brought it to America, or told us about it at least. Metalsmith and teacher Keith Lewis says, I constantly send my students to Heikki's book, Form Emphasis for Metalsmiths, to find the gems buried in its rather daunting pages. For me, Heikki will always be the guy who could hammer a sheet of metal into a knot, as you can see. This new language required new tools. Speaking about the development of the sinusoidal stake, another thing that's in almost every studio today, Heikki said in that interview, I don't even know if this is true or not, it may be apocryphal, but it's a great story. I'm just going to choose to believe that it's true. I had a homemade forge outside. I demonstrated how to taper a little round rod about as thick as my finger. Then I needed to demonstrate how to bend it. So I just started to get it hot and made a couple of bends. When I was done, I dropped it on the ground, and the ground was wet. It happened to be hardenable steel, so it got tempered. That's how it was invented. That just seems so, I don't know. At any rate, others followed, using the principles of these tools, but expanding on them. The late Dave Pimentel from Arizona State University pioneered the use of Delrin plastic to create a non-marring anticlastic quasi-sinusoidal stake. This is one of his students, Ted McDonough, and while these aren't, textbook Heikki forms, they are totally influenced by Heikki. The word spiculum was coined by Heikki in 1972. It was the first of these forms named and developed. It's a magical form. The word spiculum was derived from the bony structure found in nature, often in sponges. Directions for making spiculums and anticlastic forms are ubiquitous, appearing in books, magazines, and websites everywhere. They are part of the basic background lexicon of metalsmithing, but they all came from one place. Some show the influence more directly, some not so much, but anyone who has heard the term spiculum has met Heikki Seppä. So that paintbrush on your right is all spiculum forms. Another piece by Alexandra Hart. This was a piece I had juried into the Extremities show last year in Houston. These monoshells, the spiculums, have been covered with enamel, fabricated in bimetal, even more exotic bimetals, bimetal of bronze and gold. In this case, the bronze has been patinaed. Michael Good was a student of Heikki's in a Penland workshop. Like several others, he elaborated on the techniques and built his own career based on these forms. He says, Heikki left a legacy which continues to evolve. He will go down in history as one of the most important contributors to modern metalsmithing, although many are just beginning to recognize the importance of his contributions. He was a model teacher who opened up the door for a whole generation of professional metalsmiths. Another former workshop attendee and now a national figure in her own right, Betty Helen Longy, went on, the bottom line is that without the investigation and experimentation that Heikki did, there would have been nothing to build upon. I will miss his beautifully written letters and his dry humor and watching him work. It was common knowledge that Heikki's blows were equal to 10 blows by us mere mortals. The Bay Area metalsmith and quintessential teacher, Jack De Silva, shares this story. While I was traveling through St. Louis one year, Heikki let me sleep in his studio. After a wonderful dinner and a drink or two, Heikki left me for the evening. He waved his arm at the wonderful, huge bookshelf, saying, feel free to examine anything that you'd like to see. So many amazing opportunities to see rare and collectible books. His kindness and hospitality seemed endless. I've always appreciated Heikki's zest for life and his friendliness, says the metalsmith Cynthia Ide, who's coming here in January to teach a workshop. I will never forget seeing him dance with a horned Viking helmet at a conference in Seattle. I'm imagining that's Snag 98. Heikki was friendly to student attendees at Snag conferences in the 1970s, when that was not the typical thing to do. Our own Barb Prefke was a student of Heikki's at Washington University. Heikki's approach to teaching metal forming made it become second nature and allowed the technique to become part of my designs without even thinking about it. He also taught me that vodka is good. You should drink vodka, and also what it's like to jump into snow after sitting in a sauna. 2 weeks ago, Linda Shapiro, another former student of Heikki's, was driving me through rush hour traffic in St. Louis, which is like ground zero for Heikki. We were speaking about Heikki and the deep mark that he had left on the St. Louis metals and art community when she suddenly turned away from the windshield during rush hour, threw her hands off the wheel, looked me in the eyes, and said, connections. That was what Heikki always said, celebrate the connections, those areas where shapes and elements meet. Heikki's influence was international, but it was very hard for me to find images from smiths abroad. One, Julia Woodman from the UK wrote to me, as you know, Heikki, I'd like to do this with a British accent, but I don't think I can pull it off. As you know, Heikki was very serious about his new nomenclature for the metals field. Imagine our surprise when he allowed us to call ourselves the Hammeroids for a skit during one of the workshops at Penland. That's pretty good. The Brits are hilarious. You know, I put a call out for images of work that was influenced by Heikki. Former students, colleagues, that kind of thing. I was happily surprised at the work that people chose to send. It was not what I expected. Things where the technique of shell forming wasn't immediately apparent, like this lamp finial and sculpture by Curtis Arima, they're two different pieces. Or objects where those ideas had been levered, the shell forming ideas had been levered into something completely different, like these pieces. Joe Munch, an MFA student of Heikki's at Wash U and now a professor himself at the College of Design at Iowa State, sums up the legacy this way. I think my work has done what Heikki said research should do after studying with him. Be inspired, remember the skills, and then move past it into your own arena. For me, this has now been 25 years. Form Emphasis for Metalsmith was published the year that I took my first class. I had already stumbled upon the spiculum form when I screwed up a tube making exercise, something that I did fairly frequently. Someone looked over my shoulder and said, you know, there's a the whole book on that. That thing's called a spiculum. I said, really? He said, yeah. It's called Form Emphasis for Metalsmiths. It was the first jewelry text that I ever owned, and was the first thing that my wife bought for me when she was just my girlfriend in 1979. We were both 6. Though I never took a class or workshop with Heike, and in fact only met him once, he has, in a very, very real sense, been with me in my studio every day. He created the environment where formal exploration was encouraged. Heike said in a lecture at the UW in 2003, just keep working. Work produces work, idea produces idea, design engenders design. Not the first time it's been said, maybe, but it was the first time that I heard it, and I think about that every day. Now, I have no idea who made this. I found it on the website for Nauset High School in northeastern Massachusetts. I was just Googling and looking for these forms. I assume it was made by a high schooler. It's not an exceptionally cutting-edge piece, but in an important way, it's Heike's legacy. The processes that he envisioned, the new language that he developed, is embedded in our culture as metalsmiths. The student who made this piece, who probably didn't even know Heike's name, is carrying that legacy forward. If you're at all interested, there is a really thorough and exhaustive and just wonderful interview online conducted by our very own Lloyd Herman. So I hope you all go to it.